Hi, so this is my fourth vlog regarding my creative digital literacy portfolio. For this one, I'm going to be talking about infographics and their affordances and constraints. Now, I found an overwhelming amount of information on infographics. Little did I know, even though they're very popular right now, infographics have been around for a very, very long time. As you can probably imagine, in terms of our posters, that kind of thing, those are all infographics as well. I also wasn't sure when there was new programs and stuff available in order to create your own infographics rather than actually going to an actual publisher, and they have been around for a little while as well, not too long, but I found that very interesting because just recently has infographics become very popular in terms of being shared with the general public. Lately I'm seeing infographics everywhere, so especially on sites like Pinterest and things like that. And I like reading them a lot. So I looked at the affordances mostly from, because I had to narrow down my search, mostly from using infographics within an actual science classroom, because that's what I'm actually going to be using it for. And I found some very interesting articles regarding that. So some of the affordances that I found, most of these are from Davidson 2014, which is using infographics in the science classroom. So some of the affordances that they found regarding infographics, I'm going to talk a little bit about programs and more about the actual learning. In terms of what Davidson said, that infographics help engage students within science. It also helps to refine research to very important points, which can be an affordance. It can also be a constraint as well, and I'll talk about that in a moment. It can present complex information very quickly and clearly. They integrate words and graphics to reveal information and patterns or trends, etc. They're easier to understand than just words alone, and this is what's making it a lot more popular. People are steering away from reading journal articles and texts and papers and stuff like that, so infographics makes this information more appealing to the general public. They can be very beautiful and very engaging. I've seen some very awesome infographics that are exactly what I need in terms of displaying information, and they're beautiful in terms of works of art as well. And this is what drives me to want to look at infographics as a creative measure, as well as displaying information. They can connect with students a little bit more deeply than texts and PowerPoints, etc., in terms of communicating information as well. Stick with them a little bit more. Creating them directly relates to science literacy standards. Even looking at the Alberta literacy standards or science standards that we have for our curriculum, most of them require you to be able to analyze and interpret data. Both of those skills are literacy skills, and they're needed in terms of a science perspective. They're very, very, very useful in terms of starting classroom discussions and inquiry as well. Showing infographics to your students gets them engaged, but it also can bring new thoughts into their head that maybe they didn't think about before, and this can facilitate discussion within the classroom as well. This wasn't in the actual article, but one that I thought of, it's neat because you can use a variety of programs nowadays in order to actually create these infographics, and most of them are relatively easy to use because they are free programs. But some are not necessarily, and some are online and some are not online. So depending on what you actually want, you could have both. For instance, you could create in Publisher, or you could use a beginner infographic site like Easily. Some of the constraints, these are mostly my ideas. A lot of the articles that I've found did not necessarily talk about constraints. There's just a couple that did. So in terms of constraints, you may need a combination of programs in order to get the data represented the way that you actually want it. You may need to build graphs in. There's this really cool program called Chart Chooser from Juice Labs, and maybe you use those charts that you produce, which are really awesome visualizations, and you use them in Easily. There's a wide range. They can be very time consuming to actually make. It requires a lot of planning in terms of design. Most programs limit what you can use for free versus what you have to pay for. It requires a lot of detailed research and references, but they need to be scaled down into their simplest form. And this can be overwhelming if you include too much text. So you need to think of ways to visually represent your information if that is the case. And your research needs to be valid and detailed as well. And although that's not necessarily a constraint, it makes it more difficult in order to want to create an infographic. And that leads me to my next point, is that a lot of the infographics that I see, yes, they represent data, but they don't necessarily say where the data is from. And that's really frustrating in terms of wanting to use it as a valid reference, etc., in people's work, or even showing it to my students. I want to tell them to use referenced material, material that is valid, etc. So if I present something to them that's not valid, I don't think that's a very good thing. So those are some of the affordances and constraints that I can find, and there's much more that I can go into in terms of developing literacy skills and things like that, but I'm going to save that for another post.